I've just bought my first business under our new holding company structure, and in this video, I'm going to explain my exact decision-making process behind the purchase, the numbers that I looked at to inform my decision, and most importantly, my exact plan on how we're going to 5x the EBITDA of the business from $553,000 a year to $2.5 million per year within the first 12 months. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but this is the plan. And just so you know why I'm making this video, it's quite frankly for nobody else other than myself in 5 or 10 years. I'm very curious and I'm going to be continuously documenting my thought process and decision-making process behind each acquisition that we're going to make over the next few years. This is the first one, so I wanted to be very, very meticulous with how I documented it. So as I say, 5 or 10 years, I can look back and maybe laugh at myself because hopefully by that point I'll know a lot more than I do now. However, as I say, let me explain why I made the purchase. So I've got some notes here that I want to take some time to go through. So first of all, let me explain the numbers of the business. And this is really, quite frankly, I know the founders. They were a client of our agency. I think we worked with them for maybe a year and a half. And then, as I say, we moved into a one-on-one format where I was directly working with the company on a more of a consulting structure. Quite frankly, the reason I'm so bullish on these founders, it's a partnership. The reason why is just because, as I say, I've had such close proximity to them over the last year and a half to 2 years that I've just been able to see how they work. I can see that anytime I ever gave them advice or feedback or coaching on whatever it may have been, they immediately took action. They go ahead and implement it right away. They come back with the updated results. They're just great people. And so, again, I don't want to speak on what I like about them because, quite frankly, I don't know. I just know that I like them. And so, obviously, that's a skill that I'll hopefully build over the coming years. However, the thing that I can, be very specific about is the numbers. Now, just for some quick context before I get into the numbers, the business I acquired is a marketing agency who works in the local industry. I won't name which industry it is, but they work with local businesses, a certain type of local business. Okay. So let me go through the numbers from beginning to end. And then what I want to go into is basically the two biggest constraints. And this is really why I made the acquisition, simply because when I looked at their numbers, which I'll explain here in a minute, I could see most of the hard numbers, most of the difficult numbers to crack, they already had. Now, with the marketing agency, the most important metric that really determines, the scale of the business is primarily churn rate. And their churn rate was is extremely good, which is a really big factor as to why I actually made the decision to acquire the company, because the biggest constraint was in an area that I am very, very good at, just quite frankly. And I knew I could see the pack. It was so clear to me exactly which levers ought to be pulled in order to, as I say, 5x the EBITDA. If you look at anyone who buys companies, if you talk about 5xing the EBITDA in the first 12 months, I mean, it's almost just stupid. It's unrealistic. It very rarely happens. In this case, I could just see a clear path to being able to do that. To be honest, I think 5x is actually quite, like me being quite conservative. But even if we fall short of the 5x, if we double the business in the first year, well, that's still a huge win. But quite frankly, I think we can get it to a 5x. So let me go through some of the numbers here. So starting at the very top from their acquisition, obviously they run ads to acquire new clients. Starting that, their cost per qualified booked call currently, these are all their current numbers, is $460. Show rate, 85%. Close rate, 35.5%. Their upfront cash, so they sell a project period of 4 months. And the average cash collection that they collect on day one is 70% plus of the total contract value. The price point is 9.2K USD for the 4 months. The average upfront cash collection amount, so the 70% of the 9.2K is basically 6.5K, 6.4K cash collection that they make per new close within the first 30 days on average. Obviously, that's not for every client, that's on average. So that brings their CPA, cost per acquisition, to acquire a new client, their CAC, to $1,520. That makes their cash ROAS 4.26. So cash ROAS refers to, okay, I put $1 in. How much cash on day one do I collect back? Well, obviously in their case, they put, for every $1 they put into ads, they make $4.26 back. And in revenue, they make $6 back. So they make a 6x revenue ROAS. Their churn, this is a metric that I was extremely impressed with, is 9.6% on a monthly basis. And for a marketing agency, any marketing agency that has a single-digit churn, provided their acquisition numbers are healthy, which obviously in this case they are, any single-digit churn marketing agency can scale extremely aggressively. And as I say, it's 9.6% as of right now. But even with me looking at their fulfillment, this is by no means the biggest area of improvement. It's by no means their biggest constraint right now, but there was a lot of areas that I could see we could easily probably, if they're already getting 9.6% monthly churn with what they're currently doing, I reckon we could probably get it to 5, 6, 7% monthly with a couple improvements that, I had in my mind. And obviously, if we got it to 5%, I mean, that's going to halve their monthly churn rate roughly, which will by extension double their business. So there's another huge lever that we can pull. But as of right now, 9.6% monthly churn. Client lifetime value. So over the lifetime of client, how much money do they make in revenue? They make $23,958 for every new client that they bring on board. Their cost of goods sold on a monthly basis, so the cost to fulfill for each one of their clients that they bring on board, as of right now, is around $450 per month per client. Now, their retention rate, so on average, how many months does the client stay with them? They stay with them for 10.41 months on average. And so by extension, that total cost to fulfill over the lifetime of a client is $4,684, which basically, to figure that out, just took the monthly retention rate, or the retention rate in months of 10.41 months times by the monthly cost to fulfill, 450, that gives you $4,684. Now, their lifetime gross profit is $19,273. And then the final metric that I looked at, which I got from Hamosi, so, credit to him. This is such an amazing metric. I never heard anyone explain it in the way that he explained it. And when he explained it, I was like, oh my gosh, makes so much sense. Lifetime gross profit to CAC. So in this case, the lifetime gross profit to CAC is 12.68 to 1. So in other words, for every $1 we spend in advertising, we make $12.68 back over the lifetime in gross profit of that one client. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, that's their current numbers. Now, when I've seen these numbers, a couple of things that really stood out to me that were great. Number one, as I said, churn rate. Number two, their close rate and upfront cash collection are insane. So they're closing at 35.5%, and their average upfront cash is 70% plus. Now, this is amazing. But when I saw that, I was like, we have an issue there. And I'll explain why we have an issue there in a minute. But that shows me that they obviously clearly have a very, very, very good sales team who can close pretty much everyone. And when I spoke to the founders, obviously, again, I had history with the founders, but when I spoke to them, it was also very clear to me that this 35.5% close rate was on total live calls, not qualified calls. One of the things that's very common for closers is they're very protective of their close rate. And so what they'll do is if they get if they have a sales call with a prospect who maybe is a little bit colder, is a little bit more difficult to close, what they'll do is they'll just write that person off as not qualified, and then they'll go and tout their close rate to be 40%, and then they'll add on this little extra thing, which if you ever hear a closer add on this little extra bit, I'll tell you now, run for the hills is what I always say. They'll go, oh yeah, I close at 40%, and then they'll go unqualified calls. If a closer says that, first of all, if you're looking at hiring a new closer and they say that, do not hire them. If one of your existing closers say that, you need to do one of two things. Either completely rewire their brain and tell them to never, ever track their close rate on qualified calls, or fire them and rehire. The reason why is because unqualified calls is a metric that the closer completely controls, because it's based on what they define as qualified, right? Like if I say, oh yeah, of the qualified calls that I take, I close at X. Well, what am I very likely to do in that instance? If I get a prospect who comes on the phone who is qualified, but maybe they're just not as sold or as bought in as another prospect might be, or again, maybe they're qualified, but they're just a harder to close prospect. Well, if I don't close them, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to define that person as, quote, not qualified, which is going to arbitrarily increase my close rate. Anyway, that's a topic for a different video. However, in this case, their 35.5% close rate is on total live calls, which is exactly what you want to see. That's very high. And then, as I say, 70% plus cash collection, also very good. The other thing that I did really like about their current structure is that their COGS are relatively cheap. I think there's some cost savings that we could do there. But for the most part, $450 per month per client is very healthy, especially when I'll talk about one of the other constraints that I'm going to bring up in a minute. So everything looked great. And of course, I mean, their lifetime gross profit to CAC of 12.68 to 1 is really good. Again, especially when I can see there's a lot of easy levers that we can pull to just easily boost that. So let's get into the biggest constraints that I see, which again, once these are alleviated, this is what's going to give us that 5x in EBITDA within the first 12 months, in my opinion. So there's two constraints that I see, and I want to, again, break down exactly how I'm going to solve both of those constraints. So the first constraint is the cost per qualified book call. These guys are in a local industry, okay? They serve a type of local business, and they're paying $460 per qualified booked call. Now, for context, with our agency, we serve marketing agencies and coaches. That is the most saturated industry. As if you're watching this video right now, you're probably an agency or a coach, so you get marketed to all day, every day. The other thing is that the people marketing to the agency and coaching market and the consultant market, the people who market into those industries are also typically the best marketers, right? Because they're typically a marketer marketing to marketers, that they have to be very, very good. Because in order to acquire a marketing business, or somebody who's in the marketing world, in order to get them to click an ad, etc., by default you have to be better at marketing than they are. If a marketer sees an ad that they deem as really bad, they're never going to click it. So if you run to a marketer, you have to be better than the average marketer. Does that make sense? So what that then basically means is that the marketing industry and coaching industry get marketed to the most with the best ads. So it makes it basically extremely difficult to run ads profitably in the industry that I'm in. Hopefully it makes sense. So the reason I've just explained that is to give you context, because we spend at my own agency, not the one I just acquired or in the final stages of acquiring, my own agency that runs for the agency industry, coaching industry, we spend 10 times more than this business that we just acquired. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second thing, our cost per qualified book call is about $350 to $400. So not only do we spend 10 times more, which if you're not familiar, the more you spend, the higher your costs increase. So we're spending 10 times more roughly than this company. And we're in an industry which is extremely, like, it's not even in the same world in terms of saturation as the industry that this client is in, which is local business. So when I saw the cost per qualified call number of 460, immediately I knew there was a myriad of things that we can do to get that cheaper. So what those things are, I'm going to explain here in a minute. But that is the first constraint. Now, a sub constraint that kind of stems off this is essentially not only, obviously, is their cost right now far too high, but also because their cost is too high, that is limiting them from scaling their ad spend. Because you might look at this business and go, why don't we just scale the spend? The problem is they're at 460. I think they're spending maybe between like 500 and 800 on any given day, roughly. But the problem is at $500 to $800 per day in spend, their cost per call is at 460. Whenever they scaled it, and they showed me the numbers, it's clear as day, their cost per call rises to 1,000 plus every single time that they scale the budget. So they're kind of like, they're handcuffed almost at this level. And again, even at this level of spend, they're still paying way too much for a qualified call. So they're kind of like two constraints that kind of obviously that stem from the core constraint of just cost per qualified call is way too high. The second constraint, and this is kind of what I alluded to earlier, is the pricing is far too low. Essentially, you shouldn't, your close rate metrics, as ironic as this sounds, in my opinion, your close rate metrics should not be as good as this company's are. 35% close rate and a 70% upfront cash collection. Yeah, that's amazing. And obviously you want to try and optimize it to that level, but it actually shouldn't be that good, because if it is that good, it means you're leaving a ton of money on the table simply because your pricing is completely incorrect. So that was the second constraint that I found or identified. Now, let's go into my plan to solve both of those constraints. So let's first start with the cost per qualified call. Remember, there's two things to solve here. You've got the cost, number one, and then you've got the scalability of it, right? So there is basically 5 main things. There's a couple sub things, but I didn't really think they were very useful to speak about in this video. But these 5 overarching things that I can clearly see, again, if those are fixed, both the cost will get solved and, again, the scalability of the ad will be solved. So in no particular order, the first thing is their offer. Their offer right now is not good. And the funny thing was, in one of the meetings that we had with them, one of the founders pulled up a website of a really big competitor who is doing, I think it was like 2 to 250K a month. Obviously that's total revenue, not EBITDA, but I don't know what their numbers are, but they were doing about 2 to 250 a month, because she actually, what do they call it? Like secret shopped that company. So she booked in a call and understood everything about the business. And they're doing 2 to 250. And their offer was basically it was a patient offer. So it's like, hey, we'll guarantee you more patients. Whereas this company's offer right now in their front end ad is simply a quote more appointment based offer. So they're promising, that, hey, we'll book you out with more appointments in so many words. Whereas one of the companies that's doing a little bit better than them, obviously 2 to 250 is still not massive, but they're doing a patient offer. And so she was telling me this, and I said to her, I was like, hey, have you thought about just testing a patient offer? And she was like, no, I've not thought about that. So immediately, that's one of the things that we need to improve is the offer. And I can almost guarantee just by changing that offer, that's probably going to take that 460 cost per call to under 400 consistently at the very least, like just from that, right? And so there's two core offers that I want to test with them. And by the way, when it comes to scaling, this is going to solve both problems, right? Cost and scale. The cost, obviously, the better the offer, the more people who are interested. So the more people are going to click the ad, decreasing the cost. Very simple. But the second area of the scale, here's the thing. Whenever we scale, my mindset of scaling ad accounts in general is I would rather have 5 different things, whether they're individual campaigns, individual ad angles, individual offers, individual landing pages. I would rather have 5 different things that I'm spending 1,000 per day on than have one thing that I'm spending 5,000 a day on. The reason is because basically the costs will be significantly more consistent if you have 5 separate things you're spending 1,000 a day on. Now, just as a side note, as a disclaimer, what I don't mean here is have 5 different businesses or 5 different funnels. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is basically, for example, 5 different offers or 2 different offers running to the same exact funnel. It's just a different headline with a separate offer. The reason for this is simply because of what I said before. As you scale budget, naturally your costs increase. So if you're spending 5,000 a day on something, and then in a second instance or a separate instance, you're spending 1,000 a day, just by the very nature of spending less per day on that particular makeup of ads and funnel and offer and whatever it is, naturally your costs are going to be cheaper because you're not spending as much, right? Secondly, though, the problem is if you're spending 5,000 a day on one thing, if that one thing stops performing, or if that one thing starts to become inconsistent, cost spike or whatever it is, well, because 100% of your budget is 5,000 and 100% of your budget is on the one thing, now your whole ad account is going to become inconsistent, or your whole ad account is going to stop performing if, should that one campaign stop performing. Whereas if you have 5 different things with 1,000 per day each, again, naturally your costs are going to be cheaper because you're spending less. But more importantly, if one of those campaigns, whatever you're splitting out by, if one of them stops performing, well, now only 20% of your budget is affected because the other 4, because they're not connected in any way, the other 4 are still performing. Or obviously, if one of them becomes inconsistent, well, only 20% of your budget is now becoming inconsistent as opposed to the entire ad account. And the other great thing about that is if one of them does stop performing, only 20% of your budget is affected, which means you only need to reallocate 20% of your budget. You don't need to reallocate the entire ad account. Again, another disclaimer. This becomes increasingly important as you scale to, in the example I'm talking about here, 5,000 a day, for example, 3,000 a day, etc. If you're spending $100 a day or $200 a day, just go all in on one thing. Do not split that up between 5 different campaigns and have $20 per day per campaign. Don't do that. I would say you should start to be thinking about this idea. Basically 1,000 a day plus really is where I'd start to think about splitting it out and having different, almost like silos in the ad account. We're at a stage now with our own ads where basically we actually have different ad accounts as well. Again, they all run to the same offer. We have the same it's not different businesses. I want to make that super clear because that would just make everything far more difficult. It's just different ad angles, a couple different offers, etc. Anyway, to bring it full circle, back to this. There is 2 key offers that I just know, we're going to immediately roll out, which will do exactly what we're talking about here. Number 1, it will produce better results because it's a significantly better offer. Number 2, though, here's the thing. Their current offer, they're currently spending, as I said before, I think they've gone up to about $800 a day-ish. And so their current offer is quite weak. But here's the thing. We started with this client. As I said, they were a client of our agency, bit of inception there, but they were a client of our agency about 1.5 years ago. And when we first started running their ads, we was obviously only it was a brand new agency for them back then. So we was only spending, I think, maybe $200, $300, $400 a day. And at the time, granted it was 1.5 years ago, but at the time, their costs were, I can't remember exactly what it was, but they were consistently the sort of under $250 per call. And so what I think is going to happen is, because now we have these other offers, we can decrease the budget on the current offer. We can keep it running, but just spend a lot less. To my point before, because we're now spending less on that particular offer, I will be very interested to see how that affects costs. What I think will happen is costs will actually drop. And so we can continue running that offer. We've got maybe 400 a day budget on that. Great. That's running, doing its thing. And then obviously we have these two other offers, which I know with certainty will, again, get cheaper costs and they'll scale better because it appeals to a broader segment of the market, which allows us to spend more. And as we spend more money, what always happens is you naturally go to colder and colder and colder audiences. And so what that means is that your ads have to be really, really good to convert somebody who's cold. Whenever you launch an ad on Facebook, if you do $50 a day, for example, Facebook's just going to show your ad to the most likely to convert prospects. And so because they're kind of already bought in, they're already interested in whatever it is that you're selling, your ads kind of don't need to be that great because the person that they're being shown to is just already so bought in. They just need to see something. And if your ads are like half okay, they'll just buy or book a call or whatever it is that you optimize them for. Whereas as you start scaling the spend, Facebook runs out, quote unquote, of those warmer people. So they're kind of forced to go to a broader market or a colder segment of the market, at which point, believe it or not, your ads actually have to convert a cold prospect into somebody who's interested. But in order for them to do that, they have to be good. And so I think that's another issue that's happening here, and that's causing every time they scale, their cost to decrease. It's just because the offer isn't that great. So again, if we decrease spend on that offer, we go back to a warmer segment of the market, I think we'll be okay with maybe 400 a day just on that offer. We roll out two new offers. One was a patient focused offer. And by the way, just on that, the reason why I want to go down that route is because typically, if you're running offers for a service-based business or even like a coaching-based business, you want to try and focus the offer on the metric that the business or the ideal client you're going after cares about the most. So in this case, they don't necessarily care about appointments. They also care about a certain type of patient, because that certain type of patient is their most valued job. It's where the businesses that we're going after, it's where they make the most of their money, they're the most profitable. So of course, they want more of that type of patient. So what we're going to do is basically restructure the offer to focus just on a guarantee around a certain number of those types of patients. And we've kind of scanned the rest of the market and nobody else has that type of offer. So I think just immediately that's just going to, again, dramatically drop costs. I said before, just the offer itself is going to drop below 400. Thinking about it now that I'm talking about the offer again, I remembered why we decided on it. I think it's probably going to drop it down to under 350 per call. Again, just from this, assuming everything else stays the same. So that's just going to be an easy lever. It's such an easy lever to pull. But going back to my original point, we've got the patient offer, and then we're also going to do a revenue-based offer as well. Because one of the things that the founder has realized after taking so many sales calls is that a lot of this market talks in the form of revenue. And that's also an easy way to create better offers, is just speak to the market, see what's top of mind for these guys, see what they're talking about all the time, and then obviously just restructure the offer to focus on whatever that one thing is. In this case, they talk a lot about revenue as well as this type of patient. So we're going to split that out, two new offers. Again, all runs to the same funnel, all runs to the same sales call, same back end. It's not different businesses. I want to make that clear. Now, that will help costs. It will also help scalability, because now we can have two offers. We spend maybe 1,000 per day on each. Because they're obviously better offers, they're going to convert a colder prospect, which is going to allow us to increase the spend. And because we got two, we can separate them out, split the budget, and put 1,000 a day each, 1,500 a day each just on that. We also got our $400 or $200 or $300 side budget on the current offer. That's how we're going to be able to scale the spend whilst decreasing costs. So that's the first look. The second thing, I'll keep this one short just because there's so many things here and I don't want to go on too many tangents, but basically they just need to do significantly more creatives. So for context, with our own offer, we're spending anywhere between, it kind of depends on the month and whatever else, but it ranges between 4,000 and 8,000 a day on our own ads right now. And we produce anywhere between 40 and 70 ads per week. Now, those ads, I want to be clear, are not all individual, like completely separate ads. Some of them are the same angle with maybe some kind of small variation in the hook, right? So they're total individual ads, but they're not, as I say, like completely separate, different. They're not 70 different ads, if that makes sense. It's like maybe just a small variation in the hook. Some of them could be the same script, but two people say the same script, so two different faces, and all of a sudden that's two ads. But if you do that across 10 ads, there's 20 ads, right? So it's not as crazy as that may sound. But that's how many creatives we're doing. And the reason why is because, again, as you scale spend, your creatives tend to fatigue out quicker. So you need to have a higher production of new creatives. And so what is happening very consistently with this company is they have an ad that works really well, and then it dies out, and then they do more creatives, and then they try and, scramble a little bit to find another ad that works. And then and so they just basically are inconsistent. But it's not because everyone makes this mistake. They think ads are inconsistent. From my experience, ads are very consistent. The thing that's inconsistent is the person running the ads. They're not consistently producing new creatives each month. And nowadays, more so than ever, creatives determine everything within the ad account. There's basically no media buying that's done. There's no trickery in the ad account. None of that matters anymore. All of our ads go to a broad audience, so there's no targeting. We have one campaign per creative angle, right? And that's it. Like, that's our media buying strategy. There's nothing to it. It's all on the creative. So they just need to have way more creatives. And again, a kind of like a branch off of this point is they also need to just have better creators. Their current creators are okay, but I think we can make them significantly better just by writing significantly better copy, having better offers, etc., etc. Like, we can just make them far better, and we just need to do more of that. So again, that combined, just that, forget the offers for now. I think just that would probably take them to under 400. It might not have a crazy impact, but I think under 400 consistently. When you add that on, when you add the offers onto that, we're looking at a $300 cost per qualified call, again, just from that. So the next thing, right now, they only run to the UK. And of this type of business model, there's about 8,000 of them in the UK, which is okay. And obviously there is far more market share that we can take. Like, we're not tapping out the market in any way. But typically what we do find is the lower the TAM, total addressable market, the lower the TAM, the more expensive the costs. And so I always say to our clients, and I follow this myself, you ideally want 25,000 plus of the type of client that you want in the country that you're running in. Now, in this case, there were 8,000. And as I say, as the TAM lowers, the costs increase. It's just what happens. Whether you've got a lot of those 8,000 as clients or not, doesn't really matter. The lower the TAM, the higher the cost. And obviously, as you think about scaling the spend, if you're scaling, well, now the costs are going to increase even more because you're spending more to a smaller market. So when we think about our two core constraints on cost per call, which is the cost and the scale, just by expanding is also going to solve that. And so in this case, I've said to them, I think we should do UK and US. I've also said if they're open to it, which this is obviously to be determined, but I think they can also just go Canada and Australia and New Zealand, which is basically the big five. That's what I run to. And I said to them as well, like, if I obviously live in Australia, I'm in the UK right now, but if I only ran our offer in Australia, our cost would be probably triple, if not maybe 4x more than what they currently are, simply because obviously we're spending so much. If we dropped our spend, it might just go to maybe double. But point is, our cost would be significantly more expensive if I constrained our marketing to one country that wasn't the US. Most of the time with the US, because it's just so big, you can kind of get away with just that. But anyway, they need to expand. The fourth thing is right now, and this is getting quite technical, so I'll kind of just quickly touch on this, is basically pixel filtration based on quality. So they're allowing any person, they have a question on a lead form, which is basically, are you ideal client? If they say yes, they can go through and book a call. What I think we can do is ask more qualifying questions to really understand who is qualified and who's not, because I have a sneaky suspicion that they're getting a lot of people click yes to that question right now, but because that's the only question they need to answer to, and then they can go through and book a call, I have a sneaky suspicion we're getting a lot of people who are saying yes, but I'm not actually the ideal client. So I think we need to add more questions to the application on the booking form. And then anyone who says that they're not who exactly it is that we want, we can still allow them to book. I would also there want to track the close rate and cash collected or cash ROAS on those specific people. So if somebody says they're between X and Y, and maybe they're not ideal, but we still allow them on the calendar because we could probably get a couple of deals out of them. I want to track that segment of traffic specifically and see what their cash ROAS and CPA, well, primarily CPA, what's their CPA on that person? if we identify the CPA looks good, then of course we can still allow those people to book. But that doesn't mean to say that we want Facebook to be optimizing around that person, because it's technically not our most ideal client. Sure, CPA is great, so we should definitely allow them to come in and, close them and whatever. However, we don't want Facebook to be trained on that less than ideal client avatar. So what we can do is, in the booking application, basically set up some redirects to where if they say X, they go to a page that has no pixel. So then we still get the booking, great, but Facebook doesn't get trained on that prospect. And then obviously whoever is our exact ideal client, we can send them to a separate page with the pixel, and Facebook can, learn from that and then go find more people who look like our ideal client. In other words, we allow Facebook to do the heavy lifting for us. This is also why 100% of our own ads, and then I say probably about 85% of our clients, just run to broad audiences now. It's because naturally Facebook's just so much better these days with targeting. But also when you set up this pixel filtration structure, you basically, Facebook only sees bookings with prospects who are, again, your most ideal client, which means they just go find more people who look like that. And if this person that they're looking at is your ideal client, they'll just go find you more qualified clients. So that's another thing on the cost per qualified call. And the final thing is the VSL. So one of the things that they did recently, they had really, probably maybe 6 months ago, they were struggling actually with their churn rate. They didn't have a great churn rate. They recently updated their entire fulfillment at the end of last year, like December-ish. And so for the last, whatever that's been, 5 months or so, that's why we've seen the 9.6% monthly churn rate. But before that, it was much higher. However, the reason that their churn has dropped so much is because they added this new deliverable. And basically the new deliverable, it's nothing new or sexy. It's just basically an inside sales team. So instead of requiring the client to call the leads, set the appointments, etc., they've just now built that function in-house. And that single deliverable has not only dropped their churn to single digits, which it's at now, which is, very good, but also their close rate spiked as soon as they rolled that out, because what they found was everyone wanted that deliverable. Because a lot of this market in particular had, tried other solutions in the past, tried other agencies, and the one thing they all hated was the fact that they were required to call their own leads. Nobody liked it. And so when we started to talk about this deliverable on the sales calls, pretty much everyone was like, oh my gosh, yes, this is what I've been looking for. Done. That's why that close rate bumped up so much as well. However, my point is with the VSL, I've said about here, improving the VSL, they've not updated the VSL with that new deliverable. So I'm like, that's just an easy lever to pull as well. Let's redo the VSL. Let's hyper focus on that deliverable as well as some other things. Obviously, with the new offer, we build in the new offer into the VSL as well. Just those things alone, again, is going to further increase conversion rate from lead to booked call, to the booking rate. So they're the 5 biggest things. If we just do that, we'll be able to drop down the cost per call. I'll get into the goal metrics here in a minute as well. But the second constraint that I want to talk about in terms of how we're going to fix it is the price. So anytime I see a client or our own sales team, or in this case, potential business we're looking at acquiring, anytime I see the close rate above 30% for the most part, and the upfront cash collection rate above 50%, that's an immediate sign to me that our pricing is too low. Okay, too many people are paying in full, and too many people in general are buying. Now, obviously, there's a certain extent to that. Like, obviously, you want as many people to buy as possible, but you get the point. If I see 30% plus close with, it's not all. So if you get 30% plus close rate, but your cash collection is whatever, like 10%, then obviously that's not, a sign to increase price. You need to have 30% plus with an upfront cash of 50% or higher. If that's the reality, price needs to increase. Remember, in this case, our close rate's 35.5%. Our upfront cash is 70%. As soon as I seen that, I was like, we have to increase price. So what I've immediately said, remember, the pricing is $9,200 right now. I've said, let's go to $10,800 if the prospect pays in full, and let's add 20% on if they do a payment plan. So the extra 20% now takes it to $10,800 pay in full, or $12,960 on a payment plan. By the way, the reason that the numbers are a little weird here, like 9,200 and whatnot, is because it was actually 9,260 or whatever. It's just because it's in USD. And as I said before, they're right now only focused in the UK. So the pricing is actually in pounds. That's what we're going to go to. Oh, yeah, 10,800 PIF, and then 12,960 on any type of payment plan, whether they 2 pay, 3 pay, or 4 pay, is 12,960. Now, what I also said is basically every 10 deals from there on in, you want to increase ideally by $800 to $1,000 on that 10,800. So, the next increment would be 11,800, 12,800, and so on and so forth. Pending at the new price point, we are again back above close rate of 30% and upfront cash of 50% across 10 deals. If obviously they hit those metrics, but they've only closed one deal, I've had 3 calls, closed one, 33%, and that one deal paid in full is like 100% cash collection. Obviously, it's only on one deal, so we need to allow that to play out across 10 deals. If we see the same thing, we go again, price increase. And obviously, we continue doing that until we net less cash, because as you increase the price, close rate's going to drop. At some point, the close rate's going to drop so much that you don't actually net more money. At that point, you just go back to the prior increment where you were closing at 30% plus 50%. Now this is your max price. You stay there. And now we just try and focus on getting close rate and upfront cash as high as possible. And then typically what we also see is at some point, you can try increase price again, because the skill of your sales team should also have increased. And so there's a massive difference between not being able to charge more and the market not being willing to pay more. It's a very big difference. But for the most part, I know this sales team is very, very good. I've listened to some of their calls, like they're really good. And so I know, like, okay, if we get to a point where close rate drops so much because we've increased price so much, then I know for the most part, it's not a sales team or sales skill issue. There's always room for improvement, but for the most part, it's not going to be that. It's more so going to be just a market isn't willing to pay whatever it is that we're pitching for this type of service. Okay, no problem. We go back to the prior increment and then we just focus on our 30 and 50. So they're the two major constraints. And again, I want to be clear. These were the two just obvious, like, let's just fix these first. There was a lot of other things that I can easily see as well that we can improve. But these are just, if we just do these two, here's the numbers. Now, the new numbers that we're now projecting over the next 12 months. Now, just so you know, KPI for those two metrics that I want to see it at is cost per qualified call needs to be under $300 without a question. They are, as I said before, like they're in a local industry. So, their cost should be a lot lower. For most local businesses, it should be like really under 150. In these guys' industry specifically, they're in probably the most expensive local industry. So it's still cheap, but it's a more expensive industry just in general. So as I say, I want to see at least $300. And anytime you go through, obviously, an acquisition process, you're never going to make your decisions off of best case scenario. You're going to do it off worst case. Like, what's the worst cost per call we can get while still seeing in our case, 5x increase in EBITDA, right? And we can achieve that with just 300. So all of those things combined, I think, honestly, we could get it a lot lower than that. But let's assume worst case, we just get it to 300. Okay. Ad spend, I want to increase that to 2 to 3K a day consistently with $300 in $300 cost per qualified per call. So that then obviously solves our first two major problems of cost per call and the scale issue. Well, I want to get to 2 to 3K a day with a 300 cost per qualified call, which again, we can easily do. And then the third thing is obviously pushing pricing. I think, again, being extremely conservative, let's assume, and I've assumed, they're going to cap out at 11,800. Remember, I said, let's initially push it to 10,800. Well, I think they'll break through that, no problem, and get to 11,800. I'm going to stop there. I think we could probably push it even further, but let's just assume 11,800 paying full for 4 months. And then our 20% increase for the payment plan will go to 14,160 if the prospect decides to do a payment plan. Okay. So new numbers. Cost per qualified call, $300. Show rate, I've said 80%, so I've dropped it by a 5% absolute number because now we're spending so much more. As you increase volume, efficiency typically decreases. So I've dropped that down to 80%. Close rate, I've assumed, because we've increased price, I've assumed a 27% close rate as opposed to that current 35.5%. That upfront cash, because we've increased price, I've assumed it's dropped from 70% to 50%. That then takes all those numbers backed out, takes their CPA to $1,388. Remember, their prior CPA was $1,520. So it's a little bit cheaper, but nothing major. This then takes our cash ROAS to 4.25x. Current instance right now, we're at 4.26x. So basically, cash ROAS is the same because obviously we've dropped our close rate And we've also, even though we've increased price, we've dropped the upfront cash collected from, 70% plus to down to 50%, even though it's on a higher price point. So that's why it's kind of like evened out on the cash ROAS front. But look at this. In the original instance, the current situation right now, their revenue ROAS, so the obviously return on ad spend after the full contract value has been collected, currently is 6x. In our new numbers, the revenue ROAS is at 8.5x because, again, total contract value is increased. So now we're at 8.5x. That's also if they all pay in full. So the 8.5x is based on the 11,800 price point. If we was to assume, which I didn't in these calculations, again, I always go off of worst case, but if 100% of the prospects payment planned, cash ROAS would drop, of course, but the revenue ROAS would increase from the current 6x to a 10.2x, because remember, the payment plan amount is 14,160 as opposed to 11,800. So we collect more cash over the contract period. This basically all backs out. Won't go into the individual metrics now. Back to our Hormozi metric of lifetime gross profit to CAC. All backs out to an 18.76x to 1 lifetime gross profit to CAC. So we can now spend $1 and make $18.76 back in lifetime gross profit over, obviously, the lifetime of the client. Remember, our original situation or instance is 12.68. So just from getting the cost per call to $300, right, which as I've just walked through there, very easy to do, and increasing the price by really not that much, we now jump from a 12 to an 18 to 1 return. And by the way, to add on to all of that, again, that 18 to 1 returns, assuming all clients join on the $11,800 price point, not the 14, and that lifetime gross profit to CAC assumes that all clients thereafter, initial 4 months, ascend on a $2,950 per month, $2,950 per month retainer, which again is based on 11,800. Whereas in reality, most of those guys are going to ascend on the 14,160 option, right? Because they're going to go into a monthly, which will be based on, because monthly is the payment plan, it's going to be based on the 14,000 price point, which obviously is going to further jack up that lifetime gross profit to CAC. But again, assuming worst case scenario, we're still at an 18 to 1 versus 12 to 1, which is the current numbers. Now, let's look at the final section here, which is the ad spend. I put down here the roughly spending 15,000 a month with 10 new clients, because remember, the current CPA is 1,520, spending 15,000 a month, roughly 10 new clients a month. And so based on their existing upfront cash per close, they make 6,440, 6,500 per new close because they have such a high upfront cash collection rate. With the 10 new clients a month, assuming 6,440, which is technically what they're collecting on day one, they're making right now about 64,000 a month in new cash collected. Now, of course, the problem with that is that's not recurring because they all paid upfront in full, majority of them, 70+%. They paid upfront in full for a 4-month period. So they're making that in cash, but obviously the revenue should really be done on a accruals basis. But in this case, let's just assume 64,000 in new cash. However, in 12 months time, remember, I said one of the focuses here is going to be, where I said it, getting the ad spend to 2,000 to 3,000 a day. So if we were able to take that 15,000 a month ad spend and turn it into 75,000 a month in ad spend, which basically takes us to a 2,500 per day ad spend level, which again, based on everything that I've already mentioned, very achievable. And also if we expand to the big 5 as well, and we go outside the UK, I mean, I'll be able to do that with my eyes closed, quite frankly. So 75,000 a month in ad spend, assuming our new CPA of $1,388, that's going to give us 54 new clients a month with a new upfront cash collection of 50% of the new price point of 11,800. Again, all these metrics are on the lower price point of 11,800, not the 14,000. So if we get 50% on the 11,800, that's 5,900 per new close, which again, remember, is actually less than the 6,400. But again, because it's the contract value is bigger, that's where the extra profit comes from. 5,900 per close, 54 new clients a month, assuming a $1,400 CPA. That will give us $318,000 a month in new cash. Remember, that isn't recurring. That's just in new cash up front. We're going to go from 64,000 a month in new cash to 318,000 a month in new cash. This is, again, further excluding the 9.6% potentially lower churn rate on a number of 54 new clients a month as opposed to only 10 new clients a month. And obviously then from that point, when you back this out across a 12-month period, the bottom line is you make a lot more money than what it is that you pay to acquire the company. So that is my thought process. That's where we're at. Again, I've only focused on the biggest levers there, the most obvious things. There was a lot of other kind of smaller things as well, but the biggest things, that's where my mindset's at. Hopefully I watch this video in a couple of years time and I go, yeah, everything I said in this video played out exactly as I planned. It probably won't. And I can obviously do an updated video as well. More than happy to. Hopefully that was useful. If you've gone through acquisitions in the past and you have feedback or you have advice for me, please let me know. I'm all ears. This is a new world for me. But I'm very much excited. I'll keep you in the loop if you're interested. Like, subscribe, do all the good stuff. And I'll see you in the next video.